we last left off, it was 1571. Nobunaga spent the rest of the year crushing yet more Buddhist monks and finally putting an end to the Azai and the Asakura. But even though things are starting to look better for the Oda, things are about to get grim for the Tokugawa. Takeda Shingen, egged on by the powerless shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki, decides it's time for him to take Kyoto by marching through Mikawa, Tokugawa Ieyasu's home province. Now, Takeda Shingen is one of the legends of the Sengoku period, and somebody I hope we get to come back to in a future series and spend some more time on. He is no minor daimyo. He is serious business. He's literally the guy who invented the cavalry charge for feudal Japan, and here he's gonna use that cavalry to smash Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa hastily assembles some of the troops in his home province to oppose the Takeda forces, which honestly weren't even coming for him, but rather for making a stab at Kyoto behind him. Tokugawa sets his troops up on an open plain so his arquebusiers can gun down the Takeda. But an open plain is also pretty good terrain for a cavalry charge, and the famous Takeda cavalry horses smash into their line. The Tokugawa forces collapse. The army disintegrates into rabble, fleeing any way they can. Now get this, Ieyasu makes it back to his castle with only 5 men. Yeah, 5. He's a goner. Nobody can hold a castle with 5 people. It is ridiculous to even consider it. But remember how I once said Tokugawa has this almost preternatural knack for surviving things nobody should? Well, buckle up. Instead of writing his death poem and committing seppuku like any other daimyo would in his place, he had one of his followers light all of the braziers along the castle wall and throw open the gates. Then that same warrior began to beat a great drum. The Takeda didn't know what to do. They suspected some sort of trap, so they hesitated. Then in the middle of the night, Tokugawa deployed his secret weapon, Hattori Hanzo, the famous ninja warrior. Hattori Hanzo led a band of ninjas to sow chaos amongst the Takeda vanguard, and they did. This was the last straw. With such a bold attack on their leading troops, the Takeda became convinced that Tokugawa Ieyasu must have a ton of men inside this castle, and it was time to turn back. And so, like that, the Takeda retreated, and Tokugawa successfully kept his castle and his life with only 5 men to protect it. Of course, the Takeda retreat was also motivated by the fear that if they stayed away from their home province for too long, their great rival Uesugi Kenshin would sweep into Takeda lands and take over the place. But man, it still takes some guts to throw your castle gate open when you've only got 5 people inside to defend it. That said, I want to pause for a moment and talk about something that always strikes me as funny every time I read about the history of this period. We have this great myth of samurai honor, and on a lot of levels, especially for the lower retainers, it might be true, but so far as I can tell, the samurai in this story are all backstabbing, betraying, and assassinating each other all the time. Now consider the ninja, the actual sneaky backstabbing assassins. It makes absolutely no sense for them not to betray Tokugawa when he is down to their last 5 men, and yet they didn't, because they were absolutely loyal and true. This is gonna come up again later. Basically, the only totally trustworthy people in Sengoku Japan are ninja. Alright, so back to the story. In 1573, Takeda Shingen comes barreling back into Mikawa, determined this time to take out Tokugawa on his way to Kyoto. The Tokugawa forces are tied up elsewhere. This could be disaster for Ieyasu. But again, his famous luck holds. At a minor castle siege, Takeda Shingen is shot by a sniper and dies. He is succeeded by his much less capable son, Takeda Katsuyori. When he receives an offer from one of Ieyasu's retainers to betray the Tokugawa capital and throw open the gates, Katsuyori once again leads the Takeda into Mikawa. The plot is discovered, the traitor executed, and the plan foiled, but Takeda Katsuyori decides he can't go home empty-handed, so he decides to attack the small castle of Nagashino. Here, though, he's met with stiff resistance. The castle itself rests on the intersection between 2 rivers, and so can only be attacked from one side, mitigating the massive advantage in numbers that the Takeda have. Nonetheless, the garrison is slowly driven back from the outer works, to the wall, to the keep itself. And this is when one of the great legends of the Sengoku period occurs. A man named Tsunemon volunteers to sneak through the enemy lines and come back with relief for the fort. Late at night, he dives off the wall of the keep, Assassin's Creed style, into the river. The river itself is strung with ropes with bells to alert the enemy army if anybody's trying to creep across, and yet he makes it undetected to the other side. He runs all night and lights a great bonfire on one of the nearby hills to let his besieged fellows know he made it. He makes his way to Tokugawa, who's already encamped with Oda Nobunaga, and tells them how dire the situation at Nagashino is. Immediately, they ride off, the army making good time, but Tsunemon knows the garrison can only hold out for 5 more days at most, so he offers to ride ahead and sneak back into the fortress to tell the troops. But this time, the Takeda have switched the position of all their tripwires and alarms, and Tsuneimon is captured. He is dragged in front of Takeda Katsuyori, who makes him an offer. He tells Tsuneimon that he'll spare his life if he'll shout to the defenders that no help is coming. Tsuneimon agrees, so the next day they raise him up on a crucifix in front of the castle. Tsuneimon takes a deep breath. Everything is silent. Tsuneimon shouts that Tokugawa's on his way, hold firm, and then he's stabbed with dozens of spears and dies. But the garrison does hold out, and Tokugawa and Nobunaga arrive with their army. Katsuyori wheels the majority of his forces to face them. The fight is completely uneven. Katsuyori is outnumbered at least 2-1, but he still has that incredible Takeda cavalry that his father built up over the years, and he is willing to take a gamble. The Takeda cavalry come thundering down on the combined Oda-Tokugawa forces, but they've learned a few tricks since the last time they met the Takeda in battle. They've hastily thrown up a bamboo palisade, a loose fence to blunt the enemy charge. Behind it, they place 3,000 arquebusiers firing in volleys. The Takeda horses are slowed as they cross the river. Waves and waves of shot pour down on them. Their lines are ragged, the charge has lost all of its impact, all of its shock, and yet still some of them hurtle on. At last, those few still riding approach the Allied defenses. The arquebusiers retreat and are replaced with men with yari, the long infantry spear. It is not even a contest. At the end of the day, the pride of the Takeda, the cavalry for which they were famous, the cavalry that made up the bulk of their military might, lays scattered on the field. Many of their best generals are dead, and the Oda-Tokugawa forces follow in hot pursuit. The Takeda are practically broken. Just like that, one of the great clans falls. But in their final hours, they make an alliance with their old rivals, the Uesugi, and, wait for it, the warrior monks of Ishiyama Honganji. The Uesugi are probably the last truly great clan left in Sengoku Japan. Uesugi Kenshin, their leader, was often referred to as the god of war, and was thought to be the avatar, the living embodiment of Bishamonten, the Japanese Buddhist war deity. This could get ugly. When the Oda forces first meet the Uesugi armies in battle, Kenshin smashes the Oda forces by releasing the floodgates on a river just as Nobunaga's men are trying to cross. This defeat halts Oda expansion. It puts them on the defensive. Then, in 1557, Kenshin is preparing a massive assault on Oda lands, perhaps hoping even to destroy them once and for all, when he dies, without leaving an heir. Kinda anticlimactic, actually. Upon hearing of his foe's death, Nobunaga is claimed to have shouted, "The empire is now mine." Over the next 4 years, Nobunaga finally subdues the monks of Ishiyama Honganji and crushes the remnants of the Takeda clan. With a long series of victories behind them, Oda and Ieyasu decide it's time for some R&R, so they take a holiday and tour the Kansai. But Oda's holiday is cut short when he receives a letter from Hideyoshi asking for reinforcements in the siege he's maintaining at a castle to the north. Oda packs up his things and tells one of his generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, to start marching the army up to reinforce Hideyoshi. Oda will meet him there. He's gonna detour through Kyoto first to attend to some business on the way. When Oda gets to Kyoto, he decides to stop for the night with his page and a few retainers at the temple of Honnoji. Akechi Mitsuhide, meanwhile, brings the army toward Kyoto to put on a procession through the town on their way to the castle that Hideyoshi is sieging. But then, as the army gets close to the temple, Akechi Mitsuhide shouts, "The enemy is in Honnoji." With this, his pretty confused army rushes the temple. Oda's retainers are cut down as soldiers pour through the complex, until, at last, Nobunaga and his young page retreat to the inner room of the temple. There, they light the room on fire and commit seppuku. And with that, Oda Nobunaga's life comes to an end. Join us next time to find out what happens to the traitor Akechi Mitsuhide as we draw near to the end of the Sengoku Jidai.